So welcome everyone. This is Dropping the Puffy Weight by Fixing Your Gut. My name is Dr. Sam Shay. Thank you so much for joining us. With us on the call is my clinical intern and clinical health coach, Michaela, and my business manager, Crystal. And today we're going to be covering some of the hidden causes of why people get puffy weight, and specifically looking at how puffy weight is related to gut health and what you can do about it. And there we go. So who am I? I'm an Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner, and I help busy, health-conscious moms, entrepreneurs, and mompreneurs and leaders find optimal health in their bodies. And I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. And I wanted to thank everyone for being here. And I want to give you some of the first steps to what's underneath all the puffy weight. Now, if you're here, what that tells me is that you're curious and that you've been probably dealing with things, trying to do all the right things, feeling a bit confused. You've tried everything that seems to only work for other people and not for you. I certainly was in that position, looking at everyone, seeing how people are doing, and like these things work for them, but they seem to not be working for me. And where that's going is that actually became a basis of understanding for how the whole body systems should work differently for different people, which is why we look at systems as a whole, like gut, as opposed to chasing magic bullets, like take this supplement, take this thing, do this thing. And so we look at testing to understand what's going on for the individual. During this webinar, I would love for you to interact in the chat. Michaela will be helping monitor and with the interactions in the chat. And we're going to dive into some of the helpful info, and you can put all your questions in the chat, and we will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. And you can put your camera on if you wish. If you don't have to, if you don't want to. I know mine will be on, and it's my normal glowing self. And at the very end, for people that stick around, I'm going to give away a prize that's worth quite a bit in terms of how to help with anyone's level of health or any of their health goals. So right now, I just want to let everyone know up front that this is not a conversation about six-pack abs. It's not a yo-yo diet. It's not a trick for being skinny or any of these other type of kind of gimmicky things. So what we're doing here is focusing on root causes. It's not going to be like what's this little trick or things like that. It's and how healing your gut has to do with puffy weight, and that extra weight is not your fault. And this actually relates to my little dog, Lily, who's napping right beside me. When I got Lily 6 months ago, or 7 months ago, actually, Lily was really inflamed. She basically had no kind of waistline. Like, she was just kind of really puffy, kind of this ball. And what was going on is that the food that she was eating, the way that she was raised, was extremely pro-inflammatory. And it took about a month of getting her onto correct diet. We actually also did some lab testing on her, and her liver enzymes were through the roof. And so we had to help her deal with a lot of just kind of toxic inflammatory, all sorts of stuff was going on with her. But now she's at her normal weight. Her coat has gotten a lot shinier and softer, and the veterinarian and I are really, really happy. And so even just simple things, including labs, can really change people's lives, including doggy lives. So what is puffy weight? Um, Puffy weight is kind of that weight that you can't really explain why you get it, and that it persists, and it comes on very suddenly and rapidly. So I call this like the muffin test. The muffin test is where, you know, you eat one little thing like this proverbial muffin, and you gain 1, 2, 3 more pounds just like that. Now, unless that muffin was last year's Christmas regifted fruitcake, it didn't weigh 3 pounds. So what happened was that you ate the muffin, and the muffin had all these toxic inflammatory chemicals in it. And what happened is that your body retained water in order to dilute the toxic inflammatory chemicals to do what? To buy the liver and the kidneys time to filter out all the toxic inflammatory chemicals. So that's why people can rapidly put on weight, because it's not actually calorie weight you're putting on, it's water weight as a response to inflammation to try to prevent inflammatory chemicals from poisoning your cells. And then you can see the weight drop off in a day or two, as long as you don't eat any other pro-inflammatory things, because now your liver and kidneys have had time to filter out the toxic inflammatory chemicals, and then the body stops retaining water. And if you've had this kind of yo-yo weight up and down, that's not explained, basically, if you've had puffy weight, there's a lot of self-blame that goes on, and kind of internal crazy making from just trying to exercise more and all these, rapid diets, and it's all very frustrating and so on. And with weight like this, there's something really important to understand. There's actually 3 different types of weight gain in general broad categories. The first one, and the one we're going to be talking about, is the inflammatory water weight. Now, I've already kind of given an overview of it. The second one is hormonal toxic weight. And the third one, which is the least common, but the one most people associate with, is the calorie fat weight. You eat calories, and then you suddenly put on weight. The primary one that I see is the inflammatory water weight. That's the one that that's the one that really is affecting people. Secondarily is the hormone toxic weight, where they're not able to detox properly. So the number one cause of puffy weight is inflammatory water weight gain. And I've already kind of given a brief overview of it. And what it does is that if you're going based off of mainstream information about, calories, you think like the number one solution is to watch The Biggest Loser and see people starve and punish themselves with more and more exercise and shaming. And I think that honestly, like, that show is one of the most misleading, abusive shows on television. Like, sure, there are some people who make some big changes and they only show those people and then kind of humiliate the rest. Over exercising can actually trigger inflammation in certain people based on their genetics. And so for some people, that approach totally backfires. And counting calories, and just, it all becomes like, it's kind of an othering of the body, that the body is now becoming this enemy that you either have to placate, pacify, or attack. And it's not a very healthy relationship with the body. I mean, I grew up with a lot of othering of my body. In my case, it was severe crippling anxiety and insomnia. Insomnia is so bad, it actually stunted my growth from age 6 to 12. And I went through this just massive othering of my body, where I wake up at 3 a.m., like literally seething with hatred at my body. Like, I remember talking out loud to it, like, what do you want from me? Like, just getting really angry, like tried all these things. Like, what do you want? It felt like an abusive relationship where I wouldn't be told what I did wrong. I would be punished with no reasoning, no explanation. And then randomly I'd have one good night of sleep, and it's like I was gaslit, and I just try to figure out, retrofit what happened, that I was behaving well, and suddenly my body rewarded me. I don't know. It was just a very unhealthy relationship. And weight, it can have the exact same emotional dynamic. And with the inflammatory weight, do you gain pounds rapidly from just a small input? The harder you exercise, do you get less muscular and put more weight on? Now, the mechanism is the same, that you over-exercise. For you, in your case, you over-exercise, and then the body gets pro-inflammatory instead of anti-inflammatory because you went over at that threshold, and your body now starts to retain water in order to deal with the inflammation from over-exercise. Is fat redistributing itself around your body? Cutting calories, is it not working? So all this talk about inflammation is like, why do we have it? Because we thought inflammation is such a bad thing. Why do we have it? It seems so terrible. Well, what inflammation actually is the body's natural defense mechanism to deal with infections and repair injuries after you have tissue damage. So what that means is that from an anthropological evolutionary perspective, if I'm going out as a hunter-gatherer to take down a large animal with just a tiny stick, there's a very high likelihood that I or another member of the hunting party is going to be bit, mauled, gored, trampled, or otherwise damaged. So like if I'm bit by a large animal, what is that? That's an injection of pathogens, bad bacteria, and that's a damaging of muscle, bone, etc. So what that means is that the body has this response to inflame the area, to kill the infections that just got injected into the area, and to rush blood into the area to try to heal up the damaged tissue. That's the point of inflammation. And that's why, look, when I test genetics, that's why there's certain people, including me, that have really rough inflammatory genes, like massively pro-inflammatory. And when I got my genetics, like I cried for a solid hour, like, because I felt like, oh my God, no wonder I'm so sick and all the rest of it. And then I snapped out of it. And I was like, wait a minute, I actually now have a roadmap of what to do because I know what the root issues are. And now I have some very specific kind of higher level anti-inflammatory protocols that I do based on the unique genetic makeup that I was given. And I thought about it more. I was like, well, why is it that there are people like me that are so pro-inflammatory? Now, in my case, I don't put on weight. What happens to me is that I get massive joint pain and insomnia and depression. So inflammation affects me differently, but the process of inflammation is the same. It just affects me differently than weight in this case. So when I was thinking about why is it that I have all this inflammation, why I have all this unfortunate role, the answer is it's not unfortunate, it's adaptive, just in the wrong environment. So for someone like me, or maybe someone on this call who's got a rapid inflammatory response, that's actually an advantage in hunter-gatherer times where tissue damage and injury is very common and likely. That I am much more likely to survive, a bear attack if I have a higher inflammatory response than one of my lesser inflamed hunting party members, because I am more likely to kill the infections and heal the wounds faster. The problem is the mismatch. That's actually the name of a book, Mismatch. It's a mismatch between the genes that were appropriate for hunter-gatherer times then and the genes we have and the environment we have today. So we can, demonize, if that's even a word, inflammation, just understanding it. It's just simply a mismatch with the environment we have today versus what we evolved with. And we're supposed to have variation amongst the population in terms of our responses, because that's, humans are the most adaptable species on the planet. And it's the variation, including variations in inflammatory responses, that enabled us over the long arc of time to be able to populate all the continents of the world. So that's the point of inflammation. And it's having a really balanced inflammatory response is critical for your health and well-being. So if you have a good response, you want a quick, strong response, and then it settles down. Versus an inferno response, which is what I have, that it's overly aggressive, it's a massive inflammatory cascade, and then like it's you want the quick Bic lighter, not the inferno. And if you have too much of it, then it leads to what's called chronic inflammation, where I'm not talking chronic inflammation is the one where you don't see someone's like joints swell up. They look, air quotes, normal or normal-ish, but they've got this giant undercurrent, burning, simmering of inflammation that just affects everything systemically. And chronic inflammation is also what leads to the stubborn weight gain. Now, when you have puffy weight, it's basically an expression of overly aggressive inflammatory response. Now, question is, where is the inflammation coming from? And the single largest source of inflammation in the body on a long-term basis, assuming someone doesn't have like a chronic joint injury that's never been properly treated, it's the gut. The gut is the biggest source of inflammation in the body. 80% of your immune system is in the gut. And so if you are having kind of this chronic inflammatory response, one of the first places to look at is the gut. So when I want to talk to you about my client, Nicole, who's given me her permission to talk about her case here. So she spent years working with countless professionals, knowing something was off in her body. She's very in touch with her body. She's carrying extra weight for no reason. She's didn't understand what her body was telling her. She also, something else, like she exercises, she eats well, like she's doing a lot of the right things, but it still is like something is really, really off. So here's what we did. We did genetics and functional testing, and we identified that she was pro-inflammatory. But then from the gut testing, we figured out she's got more than several meaningful infections hiding in her gut that were causing the inflammation that she was genetically having an over-exuberant response. Then that inflammatory response went systemic. So that's what created, so just to kind of try to recap it, she had a lot of gut infections, which created a lot of inflammation, and that inflammation went systemic through the whole body. And then what happened is that her whole body had a full body inflammatory response with the water retention and all the other issues she was dealing with. So we identified and revealed the inflammation, the infections, supported her with lifestyle changes and supplements, like one to kill the infections, and then worked with mindset, dietary changes, a couple other things as well to help her do much better. So here's a quote from her. Dr. Sam was the first doctor to help me realize that extra is not always about calories in, calories out. After years of exercising and meticulously, I never lost weight. Instead, felt puffy, even inflamed. I mean, you can read this while it's on the screen, but extra weight could be from inflammation causing water retention. Within days, I noticed a shift in bloating, puffiness, and less inflammation. So this is an example of what's possible. Now the question is, what do we do now? So it's a great question. Everyone's health dynamics are super unique, and it's one of the reasons I created the systems that I did, is in order to account for everyone's unique situation when it comes to health. So there's a really easy pathway for people to get the answers that you need. My top recommended treatments for puffy weight are to get functionally tested. And a lot of people they talk about, say like, oh, trust your gut. I say like, actually what you want to do is more test your gut. And the reason why is that there's so many different things that happen in the gut, like so many different things. So let's just talk about infections. Like your in the primary, there's 4 different gut tests that I run, but the main one that I use, I'll just use that as an example. People can have infections. Well, there's all sorts of different types of infections. You can have an H. pylori infection, which is a completely different protocol than if someone's got candida, which is completely different than someone they have a worm. I know it sounds kind of gross, but which is completely different if someone has an amoeba, which is different from just vanilla dysbiosis imbalance. There's nuances if there's a virus in the gut. So even a gut test, you can't just go out and say, oh, I probably have a gut infection because I listened to a webinar with Dr. Shay. I'm going to go do a cleanse. Like, no, please don't do that. No, that's not what I would recommend, because different things in the gut respond to different things. So let's talk about what functional testing really is. So functional testing, so I'll back up to what functional medicine is. So functional medicine is the best of Western medicine's lab diagnostics with the best of natural medicine's lifestyle and nutrition interventions. So what functional testing is we use specialized labs that normal medical doctors don't use because they're not trained in them. When you go get a gut test by a medical doctor, they're testing you for like the top 10, 12, Giardia type things you get from like traveling abroad. The tests that I'm talking about are, the one is like about 4 dozen different infections. Other tests have even more, and we're looking at not just are they there, are they not there, but like how much of them are there. And the term functional means like there's optimal, there's normal, there's pathological, and then that gray space in between, that's the functional side of it. So this type of testing looks at the whole gray space in between. Nicole, she was just kind of going from one clinician to the next, and they were saying like, oh, you're fine-ish, like I don't know what the issue is, like, and it's that's kind of that unpleasant space in the gray space in functional health, where you're not well, you're certainly not optimal, but you're not like sick where you need to go to the hospital or things like that. It's like there's something off, and it's not bad enough that you can be, quote, diagnosed, but there's something is off. So this is where functional testing comes in to dig deeper into the underlying issues that aren't normally seen from the standard Western medical testing. Now, you can apply functional testing to nearly every field. So like gut testing, like there's the standard 10 to 12 things you get the medical doctors, and there's like the 48, 4 dozen or so infections and the functional test, plus like gut inflammation testing, gut immune system testing, digestion markers. Are you digesting proteins, fats, and carbs properly? Do you have, quote, leaky gut, or what's been renamed intestinal permeability? Like all these extra things to check the entire global health of the gut. Then you have something like thyroid, where you go to a normal medical practice and they will test TSH, maybe T4 or T3, and that's it. And I know when I was practicing in New Zealand, it's pretty much only TSH. Well, there's a lot more than TSH. There's TSH, free T3, free T4, reverse T3, and at least 2 antibodies to the thyroid. So functional testing to check all the other markers too, to see like what's going on as a whole on a much broader scale. So same thing with adrenal testing. If you go get a medical test for adrenals, you get a blood test, which on a fasting, which is really silly because adrenal testing tests cortisol, your stress response. So, and they're checking to see if you have enough cortisol in your system to handle stress. Well, but they ask you to skip breakfast, fight morning traffic, to go into a doctor's office where someone's coming at you with a white coat and a needle to check your blood. And you think that's going to be a normal stress response to all those things. And then we check in the blood, which they combine free cortisol and bound cortisol and mix them together as one thing, which is not accurate. to check for your daily cortisol daily cortisol stress. That you need is free cortisol, which you check in the saliva. So a functional testing doc will not use blood, they'll use saliva, taking it 6 points or so throughout the day. Super easy, don't need to do you don't need to fight through traffic, have a needle come at you. It's an accurate measure of what's going on. So that's just another example of the difference between a medical testing and functional testing. Is looking up the blood tests for adrenals, just to they're excellent to check if you've got extreme pathologies, like if you're still super low even after fighting traffic, skipping breakfast, and someone coming at you with a needle. Yeah, then you've got a pathological collapse of cortisol calatins. And if it's like super sky high, super sky high, the blood test is also really helpful at picking that up as well. But that gray space, not so good. So testing, to me, I lean hard on testing because I went through, my own health journey of being very unwell as a child all the way up through my teens. And it wasn't until testing that it really revealed all the hidden damaged biochemistry, gut health issues, etc., and the genetics that I was struggling with. So I have developed testing as the primary method of investigation because it gives just so much more accurate information that's practical, actionable, and you can check, if you retest your gut, you can see, how things have improved and if there's anything left or another layer that's underneath it. So that's the top recommendations, to actually get tested. And the first step is very easy. And one of the best parts about it is that it's totally free. And basically, you just need to give me a call. I offer a free health strategy call for people that are concerned of these health concerns. If you have other ones, we could talk about it then as well. We'll talk about your current health challenges and frustrations, what you've tried before, how genetics can possibly help you, how gut testing can possibly help you, and next steps. And you can book here at drsamshay.com/health strategy. And that's my website, drsamshay.com. There's also other things on there, like my free ebooks, one on genetics, one on biohacking the 10 pillars of health, which is all about the various labs that are out there. And you can also just book a call with me. And this is the form you'll be taken to. It's a HIPAA secured form. You fill out some super basic information. And we'll pick a time that works for you. And then we'll walk through exactly what functional and/or genetics tests work best for you. So the goal is that you can use testing. Now, testing will save you time, money, and energy in the long term. Okay, so if you invest upfront in some testing, you will then have the pathway forward without guesswork. You'll actually be able to focus in on exactly what you need to do and get there much more quickly. So this is where to book. And so questions, I want to open up for Q&A. So see what, just checking the chat for questions. So feel free to post questions and we'll do the draw. We'll do the draw after the questions for the prize. And so I see there's a question here. This is an issue with type O blood. So I think that was in reference to people having a rapid inflammatory response as hunter-gatherers. So blood typing is really valuable. There is some truth to blood types in terms of, the original and then agricultural and all the rest. And I think that it's things have gotten a lot more sophisticated than blood typing over the years, and we can actually look beyond just blood types and look into genotypes as opposed to blood types. Blood typing was really kind of the earliest attempt to understand the constitutional differences between people, and I mean they really needed in World War I from all the having to deal with blood transfusions from all the war wounds. And certain blood types had different reactions that to whether things like viruses, infections, inflammation. Yeah, there is truth to that. I would say that it's a bit more nuanced than just what your blood type is. What other? So I'm just thinking, like, what other questions do people have? Any other questions in the chat? Okay. So any other comments, feedback, any other questions people want to ask? Otherwise, we can wrap it up earlier. So there's a question here about for chronic injury. Can you say more? What do you mean by for chronic injury? Does it make sense to test for chronic injury? Okay, so if someone's having a chronic injury over and over and over again, a couple things come up. Knee injury. So if someone's having a chronic injury, does it make sense to test? Okay, so there's a couple. So just speaking in general terms, so someone's coming to me with a chronic knee injury, and like, why would I test my gut if I have a chronic knee injury? Okay, so the answer is we wouldn't necessarily be testing your gut if you had a chronic knee injury. If someone's having a chronic knee injury that wasn't healing properly, we would look at all the different factors that would go into why you weren't healing properly. Now, if chronic inflammation, now if you're doing a sport or doing an activity that was chronically injuring the knee, then gut testing doesn't really matter because there's a thing that's constantly injuring the knee. But if they're having chronic inflammation and it's not healing properly, then we would look at what are the causes of either too much inflammation that's propagating or the cause of why you're not able to calm the inflammation down. So if I would be looking in general terms, my first thoughts would be looking at your genetics to see, do you have an overexuberant inflammatory response like I do? Like I get chronic joint pain if I get overinflamed. I don't get weight. Instead, the inflammation goes to my joints. So that's one case where we would do genetics testing to see, is there something in your genetics that makes you have a vast over-exaggerated inflammatory response? And what we would do based on the genetics and the research on each of those genes to give you a customized lifestyle, diet, nutrition plan to calm down those inflammatory genes. That'd be one approach. The second approach would be, is there a systemic source of inflammation that is contributing in a meaningful way to global inflammatory burden? So like your knee may be inflamed at here, but your body may be inflamed to here. So we can try to help the knee, which is good, but if we help the body, the global inflammation that's affecting the knee will come down with it. So that's where we would consider looking at guts if there's any big inflammation going on in the gut. And then you mentioned cortisol. So absolutely we'd be checking adrenals. If someone had chronic joint pain and chronic injuries, it's one of the first things I would check would be adrenals, because adrenals do secrete cortisol, which is one of the body's main anti-inflammatory. So if cortisol, and that's what I mentioned before, if we do a salivary testing of cortisol to see what your adrenal resilience and inflammatory control is like. There's other things I could go into looking at injuries. So for example, there's advanced mitochondria testing that also checks amino acids and fatty acids. So if someone's not healing properly from knee injuries or any injury, I would want to look at their amino acids to see, do they have enough of the specific essential building blocks of life to actually repair the ligaments and joints, etc. Then I'd also be looking at the fatty acids, which is basically the background radiation of your inflammatory tone. What's your omega-3 to omega-6 ratios like? There's about 30 different fatty acids on that particular test: omega-3s, 6s, monounsaturates, saturates, etc. And you would look at are you able to rebuild the joints and heal the joints properly with amino acids, and do you have a global inflammatory imbalance from fatty acid imbalance? So another question came in about, what do you mean by genetics testing? I already have some results. So I have an entire ebook on my website that goes over genetics testing. Like the type of genetics testing that I do is different than, say, the standard 23andMe and the standard 23andMe and ancestry.com. What it is, it's a very, I'll just load up my website here to show that we're going to be talking about genetics at next month's webinar. This whole next month, we're going to be talking about genetics quite a lot. But there's an ebook that you can download right now. It's just drsamshay.com. Just share my screen right here. 1 second. Okay. So this is my website. And right here, you're missing genes. Just put in your first name and email, and you can get that ebook that explains the genetics in much more detail for after this webinar is over. All right, thank you, Michaela, for putting that link in the chat. So what the genetics testing does is that it checks for, just zoom in here a little bit. Oops. So the genetics testing, it covers a whole bunch that isn't normally discussed in standard genetics tests. So basically, the genetics testing would go through the top 15. It covers about 100 genes or so in total. Let me just mention a couple snippets. One is it goes through all the major inflammatory genes. So there's 15 major inflammatory genes. I have 13 of them, having been bad versions of them. This is why I'm so pro-inflammatory. It goes over your ability to quench free radicals, 8 liver detox genes, how well you absorb vitamin D, something called methylation, blood pressure genes, cardiovascular integrity, risks for strokes and stuff, and then weight and energy metabolism genes. It also has genes that going over trigger foods, like your genetic relationship to lactose, alcohol, caffeine, gluten, salt, histamines, and other food allergens. And then the genetics testing also looks over your ideal diet. Now this particular one changed my life. And if you're worried about puffy weight, diet's a huge component of it's contributing to inflammation that can create puffy weight. So what that means is that, are you a high carb, moderate carb, or low carb person? And you can actually genetically test this. So I was eating the most Portlandia diet ever, knowing the names of my farmers, the chickens, etc. But I was still having really bad digestive issues, and my mood and energy kept going up and down. And when I did my genetics testing, I realized that I have the carb tolerance of an Inuit. That it wasn't, even though the quality of my carbs was good, the quantity of a Mediterranean style diet was way too high. So when I switched within 1 week, one simple week of changing my diet to my genetic capacity for carbs, my digestive problems of 20 years went away, my mood stabilized, and I wasn't having these giant energy crashes. So the genetics test, and that is not something you can get through 23andMe or Ancestry. That particular genetics test is only available through one lab. And there's very few of us in the States that are trained on that particular lab. I happen to be one of them. And so the genetics gives you the blueprint for life, because your genes don't change. Functional tests, the data is good for about 6 to 12 months. But genetics tests, the data is good for life because your genes don't change. So genetics testing has a different window into your health and well-being. than the functional tests like gut, adrenal, mitochondria, amino acids, fatty acids. Both ideally are used together synergistically. So another question is, what are my thoughts on the Dutch test? I run Dutch tests regularly. I'm friends with Dr. Jones, who's one of the main educators for Dutch. I've been using Dutch for years. It's a great test. Not everyone needs it. Unless people have meaningful sex hormones issues going on, they can just do a normal adrenal test. The Dutch test stands for Dried Urinational Comprehensive Hormone Test. That's the one that checks for salivary. Well, there's many different types of Dutch tests. I use the Dutch Plus, which is the most complete version. That's the test that checks for your daily rhythm of cortisol, cortisone, 7 different estrogens, 2 progesterone metabolites, testosterone and its metabolites, DHEA, its metabolites, melatonin, and a couple other odds and ends as well. And so it's a very comprehensive hormone test. Not everyone needs it, but it's a wonderful test for people to do if they actually need that kind of level. I mean, I run Dutch tests whenever someone's got strange hormone issues, whether it's menopause, weird cycles, and thyroid, because toxic estrogen or estrogen dominance also can affect thyroid. Are tests covered by insurance? I do not take insurance, and I never will ever again, ever. I feel I have dealt with some pretty evil insurance companies, and I'm being technical when I say evil. They are not your friend. They're not my friend, and I find them incredibly ethically dubious, and so I do not do insurance. I'm happy to draw up a super bill for you to try to get money from insurance directly, but I will never deal with insurance again as long as I live. It's a liability to me to try to have to deal with a third-party payer. And I'll just to give you an example, and this is standard practice. This is well known amongst my colleagues. Standard practice that if you bill insurance, they let you bill whatever, like 3, 4, 5, 6 years pass, and then suddenly you get a letter saying, we've decided that everything you've ever done was overdone, so we're taking all the money back, and you now have to prove all over again that every single thing you've ever billed was justified. And if you don't justify it, we're taking all the money back, and we may ask to also prosecute you. So there's no. So it's a shell game that it's a standard practice with the insurance companies, because they know that a single practitioner like myself, like I am not going to take 3 to 6 months off my life in practice to try to just keep everything I've worked for the past 6 years, because they know that most docs will just roll over and just give up the money because it's so disruptive to their life. And they know, the insurance companies know this. It's just straight up predatory. So anyway, so happy to do super bill, but I will never talk to an insurance company again as long as I live. So, and I see in the chat saying, quote, thank you for talking about reason for not taking insurance. I seek doctors who do not accept insurance for the reasons you made. Thank you. That's literally the first time anyone ever said that to me. And here's something else about insurance. So right now, the medical system is based on sickness care, not wellness care. It didn't used to be that way. In ancient China, the doctors, which I'm trained as an acupuncturist also, in ancient China, the doctors were only paid if you were well, like it was a maintenance plan. And they stopped being paid when you got sick. So it created the incentive structure for the village doctor to keep everyone well and do all the things to make sure everyone stayed well, as opposed to the current system where it's sickness care. So we have a very, we're just kind of in a strange, bizarro health universe at this moment. So the way that I reconcile this, because like, yeah, I'm a functional medicine practitioner. I don't take insurance. People pay me out of pocket, and I am not the least expensive practitioner out there. I'm a high-level practitioner for a variety of reasons, like all the podcast education efforts I do, all my training, my experience, personal journey, the complexity of things I do, the level of sophistication of the labs and the investigations, and the analysis I do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do I reconcile that with the fact that not everyone can invest the level into the type of quality care that I do? The answer is education, is that I want to work with a small group of people, and that will then fund all my global education efforts. So that's why I have like 100 videos on YouTube, been on dozens of free podcasts, on summits, written free ebooks. And then the goal is over the next 10 years, as I start publishing all the hard copy books and scale that way. So the way that I reconcile the financial barrier to access for high-level functional medicine care is through massive free education and life-changing information, like in the ebooks, on the podcast, on my YouTube channel, etc. That's how I reconcile the current dilemma of the medical business models that are out there. So I hope that was helpful. It's a very strange universe, honestly, to have to navigate the intersection of business and medicine. We're wrapping up here, so we've got about 5 minutes left. Is there any last quick questions? Yeah, thank you. That's so in the chat, there's my YouTube channel, and for the you literally if you can also go to the Health Strategy Call just from my website as well if you want to book a chat. Oh, by the way, this is an example of please use Chrome, Safari, or Firefox. I'm using Brave browser and the things don't populate. So just FYI. So use Chrome, Safari, or Firefox to fill in that form to schedule. So so the gift I want to give to people that stayed, where are we? Just change. All right. So what it is that people will be getting, the winner will be contacted by email. Crystal or Michaela will pick someone at random out of the chat. What you'll get is one of my online courses, which is a $300 value. And so the online course would be the ending of, because we've talked about adrenals, would be the ending, the 10 pillars of health, fatigue, and adrenals course. And so that will walk you through all the 10 pillars of health. The 10 pillars of health are, I know this isn't a 10 pillars of health talk because we're just talking about puffy weight and kind of gut and genetics. But the 10 pillars of health, this is the lifestyle model that I put together working with clients over the years and also reflecting on my own experience. And like the course goes over each of these 10 pillars. So in brief, it's brain and hormone system. So it's like adrenals, thyroid, sex hormones, like Dutch test, for example, plus thyroids. Bowel and digestion. This is what we were talking about earlier, like how well is your digestion? Do you have inflammation in your gut? How well are you digesting, absorbing? Physical body, that's injuries, like the knee injury we mentioned. Also genetics is in here. Burst exercise and movement is the fourth pillar. Biotoxins, toxic exposure, like the proverbial muffin. And that's the fifth pillar. Sixth pillar is bionutrients and nutrition. So we touched on that with the genetics test on diet. Seventh pillar is breakfast and routines. People who don't have a good breakfast or have terrible routines. I made this pillar when I was working with night shift nurses, and they're some of the most unhealthy people I've ever worked with in my life have been night shift nurses, like, period. because their systems are so messed up from not having regular routines. Bothers and stressors, everyone can relate to that over the past approximate 2 years. It's been quite a strange ride, 2020 and 2021. Bugs and hidden infections we mentioned, gut infections when I was going over Nicoles' case study, bedtime and sleep, and I mentioned that with my crippling insomnia. So 10 pillars: brain, body, bowel, burst, biotoxins, bionutrients, breakfast, bothers, bugs, bedtime. That's the lifestyle filter in which I analyze people who work with me in a more detailed way, where we go through each of those 10 pillars and identify exactly what to do in terms of lifestyle and in what order of priority. Like, so for teaching purposes, bedtime is pillar 10, but for priority purposes, it's almost always a priority 1, 2, or 3. Like, all 10 pillars are equal, but not all 10 pillars are equal for everybody, because some people's issues are more in, like, say, like sleep and toxic exposure, while other people's is more about digestion and lack of exercise or what. Like, but my job is to figure out what's going on in each of the 10 pillars and then prioritize them accordingly. And there's tests that are specific to each pillar, and that's what this ebook is about. The biohack your biohacking, this free ebook. This is this is the ebook that goes into that in great detail. So are there any other questions? Otherwise, I want to thank everyone for joining me. Any last questions before we sign off? All right. So, all right, I think then what we'll do is we'll sign off. Robin, Crystal, or Michaela will reach out to the winner to give them access to the 10 Pillars of Health Adrenal course. And please, again, feel free to contact me directly. You can book your health strategy call. I'll be happy to help. And talk soon. Thank you so much.